The lecture hall buzzed with the typical chatter of xenobiology students as Professor Keithvar's multiple eyes scanned the diverse crowd. Humans, Zilithians, Krogans, and a handful of other species filled the seats, all eager to learn about interspecies anatomy. In the third row, a quiet human girl named Sarah Chen took notes with mechanical precision, her plain brown hair falling across her face as she hunched over her tablet. "Boring human," whispered Zixtal, a purple-skinned Zilithian with crystalline horns, to his friend Gorth, a massive Krogan whose tusks gleamed under the artificial lights. "Look at her. So small, so fragile. How did their species even survive long enough to join the Galactic Federation?" Sarah's pen paused for just a fraction of a second, but she continued writing. Around her, other students nodded in agreement with Zixtal's assessment. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having been discovered only 50 years ago. Most species viewed them as curious but unremarkable creatures who had somehow stumbled into space travel. Professor Keithvar clicked his mandibles for attention. "Today we will discuss the fascinating adaptations that allow different species to thrive in hostile environments. The Krogans, for instance, developed their incredible strength and resilience on the volcanic world of Kethmore." Gorth puffed out his massive chest with pride. His species was known throughout the galaxy as the ultimate warriors, their thick hides capable of withstanding plasma burns and their strength legendary among soldiers. The Zilithians evolved their crystalline neural networks on the ice world of Vexpre, allowing them to process information at incredible speeds, the professor continued. Zixtal's horns glowed faintly with satisfaction. His people dominated the fields of science and technology, their enhanced cognitive abilities making them natural leaders in research and development. "And the humans?" Professor Keithvar paused, his compound eyes shifting toward Sarah. "Evolved on a death world called Earth, where they somehow survived despite being surrounded by predators, diseases, natural disasters, and having no natural weapons or armor." A few students chuckled. The idea that Earth was a death world had become something of a running joke among the galactic community. Sure, humans claimed their planet was dangerous, but they looked so fragile and harmless that most species assumed they were exaggerating. Sarah finally looked up from her notes, her dark eyes meeting the professor's gaze for a brief moment. There was something in her expression that made Keithvar pause, an intensity that seemed oddly familiar, though he couldn't place why. "Perhaps," the professor continued, "we might ask our human student to share some insights about her homeworld's challenges?" All eyes turned to Sarah, who seemed to shrink further into her seat. "I'd rather not," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the environmental systems. Zixtal leaned toward Gorth. "See? Typical human. Probably lived in some protected dome city her whole life and never faced any real danger." Sarah's grip on her pen tightened slightly, but she remained silent. She had learned long ago that it was easier to let people think what they wanted than to try to explain the truth. How could she tell them about the 17 different ways she had killed enemy soldiers before breakfast on Tuesday mornings? How could she explain the weight of command decisions that had determined the fate of entire star systems? The class continued with Professor Keithvar, demonstrating various anatomical features using holographic models. When he showed the robust bone structure of a Krogan warrior, students gasped in appreciation. When he displayed the intricate neural pathways of a Zilithian scientist, they murmured with respect. When he projected a human skeleton, several students actually laughed. "So delicate," commented a snake-like Cytherian from the back row. "How do they not break just walking around?" Sarah's roommate, a cheerful vegan named Lila, whose blue skin shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, looked apologetic. "Don't mind them, Sarah, they don't mean anything by it." But Sarah had heard worse. Much worse. During the war, enemy propaganda had described humans as soft-flesh parasites and primitive scavengers. The irony wasn't lost on her that her former enemies had similar opinions to her current classmates. As the lecture ended and students began filing out, Sarah packed her tablet with the same methodical efficiency she brought to everything. She had signed up for this advanced degree program as part of her transition to civilian life, hoping that studying xenobiology might help her understand the species she had once fought alongside and against. "Hey, Sarah," called Lila, waiting by the door. "Want to grab lunch at the food court? I heard they're serving Terran cuisine today." Sarah shouldered her simple backpack and nodded. Sure. As they walked through the gleaming corridors of New Geneva University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the galaxy, Sarah couldn't help but notice how different this life was from her previous one. Here, species that had once been locked in brutal combat now studied together, shared meals and debated academic theories instead of military strategies. The food court was a marvel of galactic diversity, with cuisine from dozens of worlds available under one massive dome. Sarah and Lila found seats at a table overlooking the courtyard, where students from various species played games and socialized. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be famous, Lila mused, watching a group of Krogan students arm wrestling while a crowd cheered. You know, to have everyone know your name and respect your achievements. Sarah took a small bite of her sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. Fame isn't all it's cracked up to be, she said quietly. Oh, come on, Lila laughed, her patterns flickering with amusement. What would you know about fame? No offense, but humans aren't exactly known for their great achievements. I mean, you just joined the galactic community 50 years ago. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. You're right, she agreed. We're pretty unremarkable. What Lila didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the quiet girl sitting across from her had once held the fate of the entire galaxy in her hands. The name Admiral Sarah Chen was spoken with reverence and fear across 100 worlds, but here in this peaceful university, she was just another student trying to figure out xenobiology homework. As they finished their meal and prepared for their next class, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. For the first time in years, she was nobody special, and for now that was exactly how she wanted it. The emergency alert pierced through the peaceful afternoon like a blade through silk. Sarah was in the university library, researching Krogan reproductive cycles for her advanced xenobiology assignment, when every screen in the building flashed, read and began broadcasting the same urgent message. Attention, all students and faculty, this is not a drill. Hostile vessels have entered the Geneva system, all. Civilians report to designated shelter areas. Immediately. Panic erupted throughout the library. Students from dozens of species scrambled for exits, their various languages creating a cacophony of fear and confusion. Books scattered as beings with too many limbs knocked over furniture in their haste to reach safety. Sarah remained seated, her eyes fixed on the tactical display now showing on the library's main screen. 3 hegemony dreadnoughts had dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Behind them, a support fleet of destroyers and fighters spread out in a formation she recognized immediately. Sarah, Lila burst through the crowd, her bioluminescent patterns flashing in rapid, panicked pulses. We need to get to the shelters. The hegemony found us. The name sent chills through every being in the room. The hegemony was a coalition of the galaxy's most aggressive species, united in their belief that weaker civilizations should serve stronger ones. For the past 5 years, they had been steadily conquering outer rim worlds, enslaving populations and strip-mining planets with ruthless efficiency. Sarah finally stood, but instead of heading for the shelters, she walked closer to the tactical display. Her eyes tracked the enemy formation with professional interest, noting their attack vectors and the spacing between vessels. Classic hammer and anvil approach, she murmured to herself. They'll send the fighters in first to test the orbital defenses, then follow with the dreadnoughts to exploit any weaknesses. What are you talking about? Demanded Zixtal, who had pushed through the crowd with Gorth at his side. We need to hide. The hegemony doesn't take prisoners. Professor Kethvar was trying to maintain order, his multiple arms gesturing frantically. Students, please proceed to level 7 in an orderly fashion. The Federation Navy will handle this situation. But Sarah was studying the troop movement patterns appearing on the secondary screens. Hegemony ground forces were already launching from their carriers, heading for landing zones around the planet's major cities. Their tactics were textbook aggressive, designed to overwhelm defenders through sheer force and create maximum psychological impact. They're not here for the planet, she said, her voice cutting through the noise with unexpected authority. This is a demonstration. They want to show the galaxy that nowhere is safe, not even the Federation's most prestigious institutions. Every being in the vicinity turned to stare at the quiet human girl who suddenly sounded like she knew what she was talking about. Sarah realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late to take back the words. "How could you possibly know that?" Professor Kethvar asked, his compound eyes reflecting both confusion and something that might have been recognition. Before Sarah could answer, explosions lit up the sky, visible through the library's massive windows. The planetary defense grid was engaging the incoming fighters, filling the air with brilliant flashes of energy weapons and the trails of interceptor missiles. Most students cowered or cried out in fear, but Sarah watched with the calm attention of someone who had seen countless battles. Her mind was already calculating firing solutions, analyzing the effectiveness of the defensive positions, and noting the gaps in coverage that the hegemony commanders would inevitably exploit. "The Eastern Defense Platform is poorly positioned," she observed. "They'll swing around it in about 15 minutes and punch through to the university district." "That's impossible," Zixtal protested, his horns flickering with nervous energy. "The Federation's defensive systems are impenetrable. My calculations show that the barrier grid can withstand anything short of a planetary bombardment." Sarah turned to look at him, and for just a moment, her carefully maintained mask of anonymity slipped. In her eyes was the cold certainty of someone who had studied war not from textbooks, but from command bridges while entire fleets burned around her. "Your calculations are wrong," she said simply. "The hegemony isn't trying to conquer this system. They're making a statement. They'll hit the university, take some hostages to prove they can reach anywhere in Federation space, then withdraw before the main fleet arrives." The ground shook as the first hegemony dropships touched down in the city beyond the campus. Through the windows they could see the distinctive angular shapes of enemy transports disgorging troops into the streets. "We're going to die," whimpered a small, furry Zendali student, his 6 legs trembling with terror. Sarah looked at the tactical display one more time, then at the frightened faces around her. These beings had lived their entire lives in peace, protected by the Federation's military might, and the assumption that war was something that happened to other people in distant star systems. She thought about her small apartment filled with civilian belongings, her xenobiology textbooks, and the careful new life she had built for herself. She thought about the promise she had made to never again shoulder the burden of command, to let someone else make the hard decisions while she focused on understanding life instead of ending it. Then she looked at Lila's terrified blue face and made her choice. "Professor Kethvar," she said, her voice taking on a tone of command that seemed to transform her from a quiet student into something else entirely. "I need you to establish communication with campus security immediately. Tell them to implement Lockdown Protocol 7 and concentrate their forces around the main administration building." "How do you know about Lockdown Protocol 7? The professor demanded. "That's classified military information." Sarah was already moving toward the library's communication terminal, her movement suddenly precise and purposeful. "Because 3 years ago I helped design it." The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Every being in the library stared at the small human girl who was now accessing military frequencies with the casual efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. "Who are you?" whispered Lila. Sarah's fingers flew across the tactical interface, calling up defensive positions and troop deployments with the skill of a seasoned commander. For the first time since arriving at the university, she looked completely at home. "My name is Sarah Chen," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent library. "Admiral Sarah Chen, retired. And if we're going to survive the next few hours, you're all going to have to trust me." The silence that followed Sarah's revelation was deafening. Even the sounds of distant explosions seemed muted as every being in the library processed what they had just heard. Admiral Sarah Chen, the name that had become legend during the Frontier Wars, whispered in both awe and terror across the galaxy. "That's impossible," Zixtal stammered, his crystalline horns dimming with shock. "Admiral Chen is a myth, a propaganda creation. Humans don't have admirals." Sarah's fingers continued their dance across the tactical interface, pulling up real-time feeds from across the campus. "Myth or not, the hegemony is about to breach the eastern perimeter in 12 minutes, and campus security is about to make a catastrophic tactical error by concentrating forces at the wrong choke point." Gorth, the massive Krogan who had spent the semester dismissing humans as weak, stared at the small figure commanding the terminal with growing recognition. "The Battle of Kepler's Edge," he said slowly. "You're the one who broke the hegemony's main fleet with just 3 ships. Technically, it was 4 ships, Sarah corrected absently. But the Valiant's engines were failing, so it barely counts. She accessed the campus security network and began redirecting patrol units with practiced efficiency. Professor Kethvar, I need you to contact the city's emergency services and tell them to reroute all civilian evacuation routes away from Sectors 7 through 12. The hegemony is going to shell those areas in approximately 20 minutes. The professor's multiple eyes blinked in rapid succession. How could you possibly know their attack patterns with such precision? Sarah paused in her work and turned to face the assembled students and faculty. Her plain features were unchanged, but something fundamental had shifted in her bearing. The quiet, unassuming girl was gone, replaced by someone who radiated calm authority even in the face of impending disaster. Because I've fought this exact formation before, she said. Admiral Krexhan of the Hegemony 3rd Fleet. He favors psychological warfare over direct assault. His pattern is always the same. Make a dramatic entrance, strike symbolic targets to create maximum fear, then withdraw before facing serious opposition. He did it at Proxima Colony, at the Altair Station, and at New Carthage. You fought him personally? Asked a tall, insectoid Thrixian student, her antennae quivering with amazement. 3 times, Sarah replied, returning to the terminal. He escaped twice. Her tone suggested the 3rd encounter had ended differently. Lila's bioluminescent patterns were cycling through colors of confusion and disbelief. Sarah, I've been your roommate for 6 months. You study late into the night reading about alien digestive systems. You make terrible coffee and sing off-key in the shower. You can't be a famous admiral. A sad smile crossed Sarah's face. That's exactly who I wanted to be. Someone normal. Someone who could worry about exam grades instead of casualty reports. She pulled up a 3-dimensional map of the campus and began marking defensive positions. But normal doesn't help when the hegemony comes calling. The building shook as another explosion rattled the windows. Through the transparent aluminum, they could see hegemony dropships descending toward the campus like metallic predators. Students throughout the library pressed themselves against walls or huddled behind furniture, their various species' fear responses creating a symphony of terror. Sarah's voice cut through the panic with military precision. I need volunteers. People who can follow orders without question and keep their heads under fire. We're going to save as many lives as possible, but it's going to require everyone to work together. To her surprise, Gorth stepped forward first. The massive Krogan's tusks gleamed as he spoke. My people have legends about the human admiral who fought alongside Krogan Marines during the siege of Thessia. They said she was small but fierce, like a blade hidden in silk. I thought it was just a story. The stories are usually exaggerated, Sarah said, checking weapon deployments on her display. Though the part about Krogan Marines is true. Best shock troops I ever commanded. Professor Kethvar approached the terminal cautiously. Admiral Chen, if that's truly who you are, then you'll understand that I must verify your identity before I can grant you access to critical systems. Sarah nodded and entered a command sequence that made the professor's multiple eyes widen in shock. Military authorization codes that only the highest levels of Federation command possessed scrolled across the screen. Authorization confirmed, the computer announced in its neutral tone. Welcome, Admiral Chen. You have been automatically granted emergency command authority for this sector. The transformation was immediate. Students who had been cowering moments before now looked at Sarah with a mixture of awe and hope. Even Zixtal, despite his earlier skepticism, seemed to stand straighter in her presence. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The Hegemony ground forces will establish a perimeter around the main campus within the next 8 minutes. Their objective is to take high-value hostages from the university's faculty and student body to demonstrate their reach. She highlighted several buildings on the tactical display. They'll hit the administration center first, then the dormitories, then the research facilities. We're going to evacuate civilians ahead of their advance and funnel them into prepared positions where campus security can provide effective protection. What about the orbital battle? Asked the Thrixian student whose species was known for their strategic thinking. Sarah pulled up a display showing the space battle raging above them. Federation fighters were engaging hegemony forces in a deadly dance among the orbital platforms, while the planet's defensive grid lit up the void with energy beams and missile trails. The orbital defenses will hold for another 47 minutes, she said with certainty. After that, the hegemony will either withdraw or escalate to planetary bombardment. Given their objectives here, withdrawal is more likely. How can you be so certain? Professor Kethavar asked. Sarah's expression grew distant for a moment, as if she were remembering something painful. Because I know how Admiral Krexhan thinks. I've been inside his head during 3 separate engagements. He's predictable when you understand his psychology. She turned back to the group, her voice taking on the cadence of a military briefing. We have a small window of opportunity to save lives before this situation escalates beyond our control. I need teams to coordinate civilian evacuation, establish communication with off-world Federation forces, and gather intelligence on hegemony troop movements. Lila stepped forward, her patterns now showing determination instead of fear. What do you need me to do? Sarah looked at her roommate, the blue-skinned girl who had shared gossip and homework complaints for months without ever suspecting the truth. I need you to help me coordinate the evacuation of the xenobiology department. Your bioluminescent communication abilities will be invaluable for silent coordination. As the group organized itself into teams under Sarah's direction, the quiet library transformed into an impromptu command center. The girl who had spent months hiding her true identity was finally revealed. And with that revelation came hope that perhaps not everyone would die today. Outside, the sounds of battle grew closer, but inside the library, Admiral Sarah Chen was preparing to do what she did best. Turn impossible odds into victory through careful planning, tactical brilliance, and the kind of determination that had made humanity feared across the galaxy. The first hegemony troops breached the eastern campus perimeter exactly when Sarah had predicted. Through the tactical feeds she had established, the improvised command center in the library watched as black armored soldiers moved with ruthless efficiency toward their targets. Krogan shock troops leading the advance, Sarah observed, her voice clinically detached as she analyzed the enemy formation, Zilithian technicians behind them to disable security systems, and Cytherian infiltrators moving through the service tunnels. Standard hegemony mixed species assault pattern. Gorth growled deep in his throat as he watched members of his own species wearing enemy colors. Traitor clans, he spat. They chose the hegemony's promise of conquest over honor. Sarah's fingers flew across multiple screens simultaneously, orchestrating the defense with the precision of a conductor leading a complex symphony. Honor is a luxury in war, Gorth. Survival comes first, principle second. These Krogans believe they're backing the winning side. Teams Alpha through Delta. Report status, she spoke into her communications headset, which she had somehow produced from her seemingly innocent backpack along with several other pieces of military equipment that definitely weren't standard student supplies. Alpha, team has successfully evacuated dormitory block 7, came Lila's voice, slightly breathless but determined. Moving to extraction point Beta. Delta team has eyes on enemy technicians attempting to breach the main computer core, reported Professor Kethavar, who had proven surprisingly adept at military communications. Campus security is moving to intercept. Sarah nodded approval. Good, Gorth, take your team and reinforce Delta. Those technicians can't be allowed to access the university's research database. The massive Krogan student straightened to his full imposing height. It will be done, Admiral. He paused. It is an honor to serve under your command. As Gorth departed with his assigned team, Zixtal approached the command station. His crystalline horns were glowing with rapid calculations. Admiral Chen, I've been analyzing the enemy's movement patterns and I believe I can predict their next assault vector. Sarah glanced at his work, impressed despite herself. Your analysis is correct but incomplete. You're accounting for standard tactical doctrine, but not for Admiral Krexhan's psychological profile. He'll want to make a statement which means... She highlighted a building on the campus map that Zixtal had dismissed as a secondary target. The Hall of Heroes. Every species in the Federation has representatives in that memorial. Destroying it would send exactly the kind of message the hegemony wants to broadcast. Zixtal's horns flickered with embarrassment and admiration. I should have seen that. Your strategic thinking operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Experience, Sarah said simply. I've seen what drives commanders like Krexhan. Glory fear and the need to prove superiority. He's not here for military victory. He's here for psychological impact. The building shook as explosions moved closer to their position. Through the windows, they could see energy weapon fire lighting up the campus as Federation security forces engaged hegemony assault teams. The sounds of battle were no longer distant rumbles but immediate, visceral reminders of mortality. "Admiral," came another voice through the communication system. "This is Captain Torres of Campus Security. We've successfully evacuated 643 civilians to secure positions, but hegemony forces are converging on the library. They know someone is coordinating the defense from your location." Sarah's expression didn't change, but several students around her began to show signs of panic. The idea that they had become a target was terrifying to beings who had spent their lives in academic safety. "Understood, Captain. How long before they reach us?" 8 minutes, maybe 10 if we can slow them down." Sarah's mind raced through calculations and contingencies. The library was defensible but not indefinitely. More importantly, the longer they stayed here, the more likely civilian casualties became. "New plan," she announced to the room. "We're relocating command to the emergency bunker beneath the administration building. It has better defensive positions and direct communication links to the orbital defense grid." "That's a 2-kilometer run across open ground," protested the Thrixian student, her antennae drooping with anxiety. "The hegemony will cut us down before we make it halfway." Sarah was already packing critical equipment into portable cases with military efficiency. "Not if we give them something more interesting to shoot at." She activated a campus-wide communication channel, her voice suddenly broadcasting from every speaker on the university grounds. "Attention hegemony forces. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Federation Navy. I know you're listening, Krexan." Across the campus, enemy troops paused in their assault as the name registered. In the library, students stared at their former classmate as she calmly addressed one of the galaxy's most dangerous military commanders. "I see you're still using the same tired tactics," she continued, her tone almost conversational. "Psychological warfare, symbolic targets, withdrawal before facing real opposition. Very predictable, Admiral. Very safe." The challenge was unmistakable, and everyone in the room understood what Sarah was doing. She was drawing Krexhan's personal attention away from civilian targets and onto herself. "I'm in the University Library, Level 7, Sector 12, she announced. "If you want the human who broke your fleet at Kepler's Edge, come and take me. But bring more than 1 battalion this time. You'll need them." The communication channel crackled as an alien voice responded, filled with rage and recognition. "Admiral Chen, I wondered what happened to the Federation's pet monster. Hiding among students like the coward you always were." Sarah's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Still bitter about losing 3 dreadnoughts to a coward, Krexan? I'd offer you a rematch, but you seem to have developed a preference for fighting civilians." The insult hung in the air like a physical blow. Around the galaxy, military commanders were legendary for their pride, and Sarah had just publicly questioned Krexhan's courage and honor. "Kill her," came the snarled response. "All forces converge on the library. I want Admiral Sarah Chen's head delivered to my flagship within the hour." Sarah cut the communication channel and turned to her improvised team. "That should buy the evacuation teams enough time to reach safety. All hegemony forces will now be focused on this location instead of hunting civilians. But they'll also be focused on killing us," Lila pointed out, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through colors of fear and admiration. Sarah shouldered her equipment pack and checked a weapon that definitely hadn't been part of her student supplies. "Yes, they will, which is why we're not going to be here when they arrive." She looked around the room at the diverse group of beings who had somehow become her impromptu command staff. Students and faculty from a dozen different species, all looking to a human barely out of her 20s for salvation. "We have 5 minutes to reach the bunker before hegemony forces storm this position," she said. "Stay close, follow my lead, and remember that we're not just running for our lives. We're buying time for thousands of other people to reach safety." As alarms blared throughout the campus and the sounds of approaching enemy forces grew louder, Admiral Sarah Chen prepared to do what she had sworn she would never do again: lead people into battle against impossible odds and somehow find a way to win. The sprint across campus became a deadly game of tactical movement that transformed Sarah's academic companions into something resembling a military unit. What should have been a chaotic flight of terrified civilians became a precisely orchestrated advance under her direction. Zilithian thermal imaging, Sarah called out as they pressed against the wall of the biochemistry building. Zixtal, scan the courtyard ahead. I need troop positions and movement patterns. Zixtal's crystalline horns flared with concentration as his enhanced neural networks processed infrared data faster than any computer. 12 hostiles in scattered positions. Krogan heavy weapons team on the roof of the physics building. Cytherian snipers in the bell tower. Textbook Overwatch pattern, Sarah murmured, her mind automatically calculating firing angles and blind spots. They're trying to funnel us toward the Memorial Plaza where they can concentrate fire. Professor Kethvar's multiple eyes tracked her analysis across the tactical display on her portable unit. How do we proceed? Sarah pointed to a maintenance tunnel entrance half hidden beneath decorative bushes. The university's service tunnels connect every major building. We go underground. Those tunnels weren't designed for this many people, protested a nervous Zendali student whose fur was standing on end with anxiety. They weren't designed for war either, Sarah replied, already moving toward the entrance. But we adapt. That's what makes us dangerous. As they descended into the tunnel system, the sounds of battle became muffled but more ominous. Explosions echoed through the underground passages like distant thunder, while the vibrations of heavy weapons fire made dust rain from the ceiling. Lila's bioluminescent patterns provided eerie blue light in the darkness as they navigated the narrow corridors. Sarah, she whispered, back at Kepler's Edge, what really happened? Sarah paused at a junction, consulting her mental map of the tunnel system. 3 hegemony dreadnoughts, 8 destroyers, and 47 fighter squadrons attacked a Federation convoy carrying refugees from the Outer Rim worlds. 5,000 civilians, mostly families fleeing hegemony occupation. Her voice was flat, professional, but something in her tone suggested deeper emotions carefully controlled. I had 1 heavy cruiser, 2 destroyers, and a damaged frigate. Conventional tactics said we should have withdrawn and called for reinforcements. But you didn't, Gorth said. It wasn't a question. I couldn't, Sarah replied, leading them down a corridor that angled toward the administration building. Those civilians had nowhere else to run. If the hegemony caught them, they'd be enslaved or worse. She stopped at another junction, listening for sounds of enemy movement above. So I did something Admiral Krexon didn't expect. Instead of fighting a defensive battle, I attacked. Zixtal's horns flickered with calculation. The tactical report said you used some kind of advanced human strategy. Sarah's laugh was bitter. Advanced human strategy is usually just desperation combined with willingness to take risks that sane commanders avoid. I rammed my flagship into their lead dreadnought while my other ships flanked their formation. The group stared at her in shocked silence. Ramming maneuvers were considered last resort tactics, usually resulting in the destruction of both vessels. My ship was already taking critical damage, Sarah explained. The hull was breached in 17 sections. Life support was failing and our main weapons were offline. But the ship itself became a weapon. 2,000 tons of metal and ceramic at relativistic speeds. You sacrificed your own ship, breathed Professor Kethvar. I sacrificed my ship to save the convoy, Sarah corrected. The explosion crippled Krexhan's flagship and disrupted their formation long enough for my other vessels to destroy their command structure. After that, it was just cleanup. They emerged from the tunnels into the basement of the administration building, where the emergency bunker's reinforced entrance waited behind multiple security barriers. Sarah's authorization codes opened locks that most beings didn't even know existed. The bunker was a marvel of Federation engineering, designed to coordinate planetary defense from a protected underground facility. Banks of communication equipment lined the walls, while tactical displays showed real-time data from across the system. Now this is more like it, Sarah said with satisfaction, settling into the command chair like she belonged there. Professor, establish contact with the orbital defense platforms. Lila, coordinate with evacuation teams. Zixtal, I need you to analyze hegemony communication patterns and predict their next move. As her impromptu staff took their positions, Sarah pulled up a comprehensive view of the battle raging above and around them. The orbital engagement was proceeding exactly as she had predicted, with Federation forces holding the defensive line while taking steady casualties. Admiral, came Captain Torres's voice through the communication system. Hegemony forces have reached the library. They seem very disappointed that you're not there. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. I imagine they are. Redirect all security teams to defensive positions around civilian shelters. We've bought them enough time to dig in properly. Understood. What about the enemy assault on your position? Let me worry about that, Sarah replied, her fingers dancing across tactical displays with practiced ease. I have a few surprises left. The building shook as hegemony forces began their assault on the administration complex above. Through the bunker's sensor feeds, they could watch enemy troops advancing through corridors that Sarah had walked as a student just hours before. They're using the same approach pattern they did at the library, Zixtal observed, his analysis scrolling across secondary screens. Krogan shock troops as Alithian technical support, Cytherian infiltrators. Krexhan lacks imagination, Sarah said dismissively. He's been using variations of the same tactics for years. It's what made him easy to defeat before. She activated the building's internal defense systems, which had been dormant since the facility's construction decades earlier. Suddenly, the advancing hegemony troops found themselves facing automated turrets, security barriers, and environmental hazards that turned familiar corridors into death traps. The building itself is fighting back, Gorth observed with appreciation. Federation architecture includes defensive capabilities that most species overlook, Sarah explained. Redirecting power from non-essential systems to weapons platforms, we learned to think defensively after Earth's history of warfare. The tactical display showed hegemony forces stalling as they encountered unexpected resistance. What should have been a simple assault on an academic building had become a complex siege operation. Admiral Chen, came a new voice through the communication system, one that made Sarah's expression harden with recognition. I know you're listening. Admiral Krexhan himself was now addressing her directly, his voice filled with frustrated rage. You cannot hide forever, human. Surrender now and I will make your death quick. Sarah activated the response channel, her voice calm and professional. Admiral Krexhan, still making threats you can't back up, I see. Tell me, how many troops have you lost trying to capture a single building? The silence that followed suggested her question had hit its mark. You're fighting students and faculty, she continued, and you're losing. Perhaps you should consider whether the hegemony's reputation can survive another defeat at human hands. The response was a roar of pure fury that made even Gorth flinch, but Sarah simply smiled and continued her work, orchestrating a defense that was turning a routine terrorist attack into Admiral Krexhan's worst nightmare, a public demonstration of his tactical inadequacy. The tide of battle shifted when Sarah activated the university's most closely guarded secret. Its research facility wasn't just academic, but also military. Hidden beneath the innocent facade of scientific inquiry, New Geneva University served as a testing ground for Federation defensive technologies. Deploying experimental defense grid, Sarah announced, her hands moving across controls that shouldn't have existed in an academic setting. Everyone might want to hold on to something. The building's structure transformed around them as hidden panels slid away to reveal weapon emplacements, shield generators, and sensor arrays that belonged on a military starship, rather than a university campus. The basement bunker revealed itself as a genuine command center, complete with tactical holographs and real-time battlefield coordination systems. By the ancestors, whispered Gorth, his massive frame dwarfed by the technological marvels emerging from concealed compartments. This place is a fortress. Professor Kethavar's multiple eyes blinked in rapid succession. Sarah, how did you know about any of this? These systems aren't in any university documentation. Sarah's expression grew distant as she coordinated defensive systems that responded to her commands with military precision, because I helped design them 3 years ago. The Federation needed testing facilities for new technologies, and what better cover than an academic institution? The implications hit her former classmates like a physical blow. Their quiet, unremarkable human friend hadn't just been hiding her identity as a war hero. She had been instrumental in creating the very defenses now saving their lives. Through the tactical displays, they watched hegemony assault teams encounter resistance that defied all expectations. Corridors filled with defensive plasma grids, gravity wells that pinned attackers to walls, and automated systems that seemed to anticipate enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. The neural prediction matrix is working perfectly, Sarah observed with professional satisfaction. It analyzes enemy behavioral patterns and adjusts defensive responses in real time. Zixtal's crystalline horns glowed as his enhanced intellect processed the implications. You've created a building that learns how to fight. More than that, Sarah replied. pulling up tactical data that showed enemy forces retreating from multiple assault points. I've created a building that learns how specific commanders fight. Every move Krexhan's troops make feeds data into the system, making it more effective against his particular tactical preferences. The communication array crackled with intercepted hegemony. Transmissions as enemy commanders struggled to adapt to defenses that seemed to predict their every strategy. What had begun as a simple raid to capture hostages and make a statement had become a humiliating defeat that was being broadcast across the galaxy. "Admiral," came Captain Torres's voice, filled with amazement. "Hegemony forces are withdrawing from the campus. Repeat, all enemy ground forces are pulling back to their landing zones." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Krexhan's realized that he's not facing civilians anymore. He's facing a prepared defensive position with technology he doesn't understand. "But they're not withdrawing from the system," Lila observed, her bioluminescent patterns showing confusion as she monitored communication feeds. "The orbital battle is intensifying." Sarah's expression darkened as she analyzed the space-based tactical situation. "He's escalating. If he can't achieve his objectives through ground assault, he'll resort to orbital bombardment." The possibility sent chills through everyone in the bunker. Orbital bombardment meant the complete destruction of everything on the planet's surface, civilian and military alike. "Can the planetary shields hold?" asked Professor Kethvar. Sarah studied the energy readings and defensive projections with the cold calculation of someone who had faced this scenario before. "Against concentrated fire from 3 dreadnoughts? Not indefinitely. We have maybe 20 minutes before they punch through." She activated the bunker's most powerful communication array, broadcasting on all Federation emergency frequencies. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen requesting immediate military assistance. New Geneva University is under attack by Admiral Krexhan's fleet. Civilian population exceeds 1 million beings." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the galaxy, Federation commanders who had served with Sarah during the Frontier Wars responded to her call with the urgency reserved for legends. "Admiral Chen, this is Commodore Veital of the 7th Fleet. We're 3 hours out at maximum hyperspace velocity." "Admiral," Commander Rex of the Krogan 1st Battalion, "my ships are closer but still 90 minutes from your position." "Sarah," came a familiar voice that made her pause in surprise. "This is Admiral Shen of the 5th Fleet. I'm 45 minutes out with 2 dreadnoughts and a full escort." Admiral Shen had been Sarah's mentor during her early career, the commander who had taught her that sometimes the impossible was just another word for necessary. "Marcus," she said, allowing emotion to creep into her voice for the first time, "it's good to hear from you. When we heard the hegemony was targeting civilian institutions, the entire fleet volunteered for this mission," Shen replied. "Nobody threatens students on our watch." Around the bunker, Sarah's companions watched as the quiet girl they had known transformed into something that commanded respect and loyalty from military commanders across the galaxy. The scope of her influence was becoming clear, and with it, the magnitude of what she had given up to live a normal life. "The Federation fleet won't arrive in time," Zixtal observed, his calculations showing the gap between enemy bombardment capabilities and friendly reinforcement schedules. Sarah's smile was sharp with anticipation. "They don't need to arrive. They just need to be close enough to detect what happens next." She activated systems that had been hidden even from the university's defensive grid, controls that required the highest levels of Federation military authorization. The building around them hummed with power as experimental technologies came online. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various classifications," Sarah announced, her voice carrying the confidence that had made her legendary. "You're about to witness the field test of humanity's latest contribution to galactic defense technology." Above them, Admiral Krexhan's fleet prepared to demonstrate their superiority through the complete annihilation of a world that dared to resist. But in the depths of a university bunker, Admiral Sarah Chen was preparing to remind the galaxy why humans had earned their place among the stars, not through strength or technology, but through their refusal to accept defeat even when faced with impossible odds. The real battle was about to begin, and this time Sarah wasn't commanding from the bridge of a damaged starship. She was fighting from a position of strength, with technology designed specifically to turn the tables on enemies who thought they understood the limits of human ingenuity. The moment Admiral Krexhan's fleet opened fire on the planet's surface, Sarah activated humanity's most carefully guarded secret, the Prometheus Defense Network. What appeared to be a simple university campus revealed itself as something far more significant. Hidden beneath every major Federation world, disguised as civilian infrastructure, lay defensive systems that represented the pinnacle of human military engineering. New Geneva University wasn't just a testing facility. It was the command center for an experimental planetary defense system that could engage targets in orbit. Prometheus Network Online, Sarah announced, her voice carrying the weight of history. All defensive stations report ready status. Across the planet's surface, what had appeared to be communication towers, research facilities, and even decorative monuments transformed into weapons platforms that rose from concealed positions. The orbital bombardment that should have devastated the planet instead struck shields that absorbed and redirected the energy back toward its source. Impossible, came Crexon's voice over the intercepted communication channels. No planetary defense system can project shields at that altitude. Sarah's response was broadcast across all frequencies, ensuring that every ship in the system could hear her words. Admiral Crexon, allow me to introduce you to human engineering philosophy. We don't just build weapons. We build solutions. The tactical display showed energy readings that defied conventional understanding. The Prometheus network wasn't simply deflecting the orbital bombardment. It was channeling the energy through underground conduits and focusing it into concentrated beams that struck back at the attacking fleet. You're turning their own weapons against them, breathed Zixtal, his enhanced intellect struggling to process the implications of what he was witnessing. Better than that, Sarah replied, her fingers dancing across controls that coordinated defensive operations across an entire world. We're demonstrating that every attack on civilian populations makes the defenders stronger. The more force they use, the more force we can return. The first hegemony destroyer exploded in a brilliant flash as reflected energy overwhelmed its shields. Admiral Crexon's tactical advantage was evaporating as his own weapons became liabilities rather than assets. Admiral Chen, came Admiral Shen's voice through the communication array. Our sensor readings are off the charts. What exactly are you doing down there? Ending a war, Marcus, Sarah replied calmly. The hegemony has spent 5 years believing that superior firepower guarantees victory. It's time to teach them that there are other kinds of strength. Through the bunker's main display, they watched as hegemony forces throughout the system began to falter. Ships that had approached expecting easy victory found themselves facing defensive systems that turned aggression into suicide. The psychological impact was devastating. Enemy commanders who had built their reputations on overwhelming force suddenly discovered that force alone was insufficient. Sarah, Lila said quietly, her bioluminescent pattern showing awe and something approaching fear. This technology could change everything. No world would ever be helpless again. Sarah's expression grew solemn as she watched the tactical situation evolve. That's the idea. Humanity learned something important from our history on Earth. The best defense isn't walls or weapons. It's making aggression too costly to sustain. A second hegemony ship fell to reflected fire, and panic began to spread through Admiral Crexon's fleet. Commanders who had never faced serious resistance were discovering what human opponents had learned through generations of warfare. Victory isn't always about being stronger than your enemy. Sometimes it's about making your enemy defeat themselves. All ships withdraw immediately, came Crexon's order, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. This is not a strategic target. But Sarah wasn't finished. She activated a communication channel that reached beyond the local system, broadcasting across hyperspace networks to every inhabited world in the galaxy. Citizens of the galaxy, she said, her voice carrying the authority that had once commanded fleets. Today the hegemony learned an important lesson about the Federation's commitment to protecting civilian populations. Their attack on New Geneva University was intended to demonstrate that nowhere is safe from their aggression. The tactical display showed hegemony ships fleeing the system as fast as their engines could carry them, pursued by energy beams that struck with surgical precision whenever they attempted to return fire. Instead, they have demonstrated something far different, Sarah continued. They have shown that aggression against civilian targets is not only morally wrong, but tactically foolish. Every world in the Federation now possesses defensive capabilities that make conquest impossible and retaliation inevitable. It was a bluff, of course. New Geneva was the only world equipped with the Prometheus network, but Krexhan and his commanders had no way of knowing that. The psychological impact would ripple across the galaxy, making every hegemony commander question whether their next target might harbor similar surprises. The frontier wars are over, Sarah announced to the galaxy, not because we have won, but because we have made winning irrelevant. The Federation offers peace, prosperity, and protection to all species willing to coexist. To those who choose aggression, we offer the same fate that befell Admiral Krexhan's fleet today. The communication ended, and silence filled the bunker as everyone absorbed the magnitude of what had just occurred. A quiet university student had not only revealed herself as a legendary military commander, but had also ended a galactic conflict through a single demonstration of defensive technology. "Is it really over?" asked Professor Kethvar, his multiple eyes reflecting the tactical displays that showed clear space where an enemy fleet had been minutes before. Sarah leaned back in the command chair, suddenly looking like the tired young woman she actually was rather than the legend she had become. "The shooting war is over. Admiral Krexhan will report to the Hegemony Council that the Federation possesses defenses that make aggression suicidal. They'll turn to diplomacy or find other targets." "And you?" Lila asked softly. "Will you go back to being just Sarah Chen, xenobiology student?" Sarah looked around the bunker at the faces of beings who had started the day as her classmates and ended it as her command staff. Humans, Krogans, Zilithians, and others who had worked together under impossible circumstances to save lives and end a war. "I don't think that's possible anymore," she said with a sad smile. "Admiral Sarah Chen is out of retirement whether she wants to be or not." Gorth stepped forward, his massive frame somehow respectful despite his species' legendary pride. "Admiral, it would be an honor to serve under your command again. My clan would consider it a privilege to join your forces." One by one, the others voiced similar sentiments. Professor Kethvar offered the resources of the university's xenobiology program for diplomatic missions. Zixtal requested assignment to her tactical staff. Even the nervous Zendali student asked if there might be a place for someone with his administrative skills. Sarah looked at these beings who had become her friends and colleagues, and realized that her quiet life of academic anonymity was over, but perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The galaxy still had challenges that required the kind of thinking that made humans dangerous, the willingness to take impossible risks, the refusal to accept defeat, and the ingenuity to turn weakness into strength. "All right," she said finally, "but we do this differently than before. No more reactive warfare. No more responding to crises after they develop. We build something better. A future where wars end not because someone wins, but because everyone realizes they're pointless." As Federation reinforcements arrived to secure the system and begin negotiations with hegemony representatives who suddenly had great interest in peace talks, Admiral Sarah Chen began planning not for the next battle, but for the peace that would make all future battles unnecessary. The quiet student was gone forever, but in her place was something the galaxy needed even more. A leader who understood that the greatest victory wasn't defeating your enemies, but convincing them to become your allies instead.